Hari Om and a very good evening to all. We are doubly delighted today as we announce two wonderful events this month. The first one is an interview of Guruji with Shailaja Menon on the art of parenting guided by eternal wisdom. That will be on the 7th of August, Friday at 5 p.m. Just 2 days from today. Please promote this with family and friends to ensure maximum participation. You could watch this interview on live on Facebook, either from Wisdom Foundation page or Shailaja Menon's page. Whichever page you choose, please log in about 5 minutes earlier and enjoy the music. At the same time, please click on the share button. I repeat, please click on the share icon so that many others too could benefit from this wonderful interview. So around 4:45 p.m., you could log in, click on the share icon and enjoy the music. We also have finalized the inaugural date and topic for our North America classes. The auspicious start is on the 16th of August. The topic would be Eternal Wisdom, a Manual to Life. Many of us have children in the US. Please send the details to them. Also take this opportunity to inform your friends and family there. Kindly also ask them to click on the blue link in the form and request them to submit the filled in Google form so that we can inform them about our programs. And here is the best news. We too in India could join in if it is convenient. I surely am. Hope most of you too. So get that lovely aromatic cup of coffee at 5 a.m. on Monday morning and attend classes from 5:30. Perfect. For any further clarification or assistance, do not hesitate to contact us. We would be happy to help. The details would be posted on the Satsang group. Namaskaram.
Sahana vavatu sahanau bhunaktu sahaviryam karavavahai tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. We shall chant Bhajagovindam from verses 21 to 30. We will begin with the first verse. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Govindam Bhaja Mudhamate, Samprapte San Nihite Kale, Nahi Nahi Rakshati Dukran Karane. Punarapi Jananam, Punarapi Maranam, Punarapi Janani Jathare Shayanam, Iha Samsare Bahudustare, Kripaya Pare Pahi Murare. Rathya Charpata विरचितकण्ठः पुण्या पुण्यविवर्जितपन्थः योगी योगनि योजितचेतो रमते बालोन् मत्तवदेव कस्त्वं कोऽहं कुत आयातः कामे जननी को मे तातः इति परिभावय सर्वमसारं विश्वं त्यक्त्वा स्वप्नविचारम् त्वयि मयि चान्य त्रैको विष्णुः व्यर्थं कूप्यसि मय्यसहिष्णुः भवसमचित्तः सर्वत्र त्वं वाञ्छस्य चिराध्यधि विष्णु त्वम् शत्रौ मित्रे पुत्रे बन्धौ मा कुरु यत्नं विग्रहसन्धौ सर्वस्मिन्नपि पश्यात्मानं सर्वत्रोत्सृज भेदाज्ञानम् कामं क्रोधं लोभं मोहं त्यक्त्वात्मानं पश्यति सोऽहम् आत्मज्ञानविहीना मूढा ते पच्यन्ते नरकनिगूढा गेयं गीता नाम सहस्रं ध्येयं श्रीपति रूपमजस्रं नेयं सज्जन संघे चेत्तं देयं दीनज नाय च वेत्तम् सुखतः क्रियते रामाभोगः पश्चादन्तशरीरे रोगः यद्यपि लोके मरणं शरणं तदपि न मुञ्चति पापाचरणम् अर्थमनर्थं भावय नित्यं नास्ति ततः सुख लेश सत्यम् उत्त्रादपि धन भाजां भीतिः सर्वत्रैषा विहिता रीतिः प्राणायामं प्रत्याहारं नित्यानित्यविवेकविचारं जाप्यसमेतसमाधिविधानं कुर्ववधानं महधवधानम् गुरुचरणाम्भुज निर्भरभक्तः संसाराद्व्यचिराद्भवमुक्तः सेन्द्रियमानस नियमादेवं द्रक्ष्यसि निजहृदयस्थं देवं भज गोविन्दं भज गोविन्दं गोविन्दं भज मूढमते संप्राप्ते सन्निहिते काले नहि नहि रक्षति डुक्कृङ्करणे नहि नहि रक्षति डुक्कृङ्करणे नहि नहि रक्षति डुक्कृङ्करणे. The last video was the 25th verse, where we learned about the capacity to see beyond the all differences, to be able to see a common oneness, to be able to see the common denominator to be able to see the one Atman everywhere. So he said, Shatrau, Mitre, Putre, Bandhau. The relationships we create, it's either an enemy, a friend, a relative, or a son. All these relationships we go about creating, it is purely created because of a selfish relationship you establish with the world. The moment you have no axe to grind, the moment you don't entertain any selfish expectation, there is no difference between an enemy or a son. So all the relationships you establish, from the furthermost to the closest, creates a certain differences in your perception. So when you look at the world, you look at a world based on plurality. You see things and beings. You see Nama Rupa, which is nothing but the names and forms. So the various names and forms only go about creating a certain liking and a disliking, a certain love and a hatred to the world. But if you want to identify with the self and create a oneness with the world, you will have to identify with the Atman. So that spiritual journey starts with having a sense of plurality, and that plurality is me seeing a world of things and beings, the pluralistic phenomena. Just like that pure colorless light, the pure colorless light, when it passes through a prism, we have the vibrant colors, isn't it? The violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, the various vibrant colors. So are you seeing the pure colorless light, or are you caught up in the vibrant expression of the various colors and forms of the world, the plurality? So the spiritual progression is to go beyond the vibrant and to see the colorless light. You have to break through that prism, the prism of the individuality of the body, mind, and intellect. So the prism, can you imagine this? The prism of the individual, which is the BMI, the body, mind, and intellect. When the consciousness passes through that prism, when the light passes through the prism, it gets the vibrant expression. So when the consciousness passes through the prism of the individuality, you have the pluralistic expression. Now you will have to retrace your steps back. So when one spiritually evolves, that plurality slowly gets dissolved, and at some stage, at a very high spiritual stage, becomes the duality. Plurality is you seeing Nama Rupa, names and forms. Like when you look at people, you look at them as Indians, you look at them as politicians, you differentiate them based on caste system, you differentiate based on social status, region, etc., etc. So you see so many different demarcations. That slowly becomes duality. A hell lot needs to be done to move from plurality to duality. Duality is where you and God alone exist, where you see God everywhere. I see that reality which is pervading everywhere, but it is not plurality anymore. I see the same Brahman which is there everywhere, LCM, the lowest common multiple. You go to the very bottom of it. What is there behind everything is the Atman, the reality. Brahman supports everything. In fact, when you look at the Lord Shiva, when you go to a temple and look at the idol of Lord Shiva, what is it that you see? What is it that you see? You see a U rather. Don't you see a U? What you see is actually a half ellipsoid. What you do not see is the other half, which is buried in the ground. You know what that means? What you are seeing is the manifested world. That manifested world is supported by the unmanifest reality. And that manifested world cannot stand on its own without the support of the other half ellipsoid, which is the unmanifest truth, the reality, the Brahman. So when you worship the seen, you are only trying to attune to the unseen. It is that unmanifest reality, the Brahman, which supports everything. So you should be able to see that. So duality is where you see Brahman everywhere. Forgive me if the language is very poetic, very high. I'm just trying to sum up what was said last week. Now I'll also give you the applied philosophy at the end of it. We have mentioned of it, but I'll just quickly run through it and move on. Plurality, then comes duality, and from duality, you hit the goal. The goal is, after duality, where do you reach? What do you reach after duality? Plurality. From plurality, you come to duality, and from duality, you come to some people are very sure. Siddharamanji said reality, the self, oneness, the singularity, not sure. I like that part. That not sure part is very promising, because when you are sure, then there's nothing much to say, isn't it? The unmanifest reality, Brahman, the all-pervading, you become the self, singular. Gayatri Ma is very sure. I am that Brahman, Advaita. In fact, what you reach, Ramana Garu has correctly said it, from the non-dual, you don't reach one. They never call that state of Brahman as one. They call it Advayam. They call it the non-dual. They call it the non-two, not two. That's the unique style of the Shastras. They say the state of Brahman is not two, non-dual, Advayam, which is one. Not two means one. But why do they say not one? Why are they saying not two? See, moment you say it is one, moment you say it is ekam, you're trying to be very definite. You're giving a very specific definition to God. And God cannot be captured in an intellectual concept. So my dear, please don't bring down God to a mere idea or an ideology which you think you can capture with your brilliant head. I am an IIT, I am an IIM, I am postgraduate, I am a research scholar, I have done this school, I have come from that college, I have mastered in that field. All of your degree, all of your brilliance, all of your wisdom cannot capture God in a concept. Therefore, you can't say God is one. They say not two. Just to tell you that God is not an intellectual concept. It is just that becoming. So from plurality, you get to duality. From duality, you get to non-dual. Now, this is as far as the absolute state of a fact is concerned. This is a statement of fact, which is what the verse says. Now, how do you start seeing the self in others? That is a long, long way to go. If you are able to see Brahman even in someone you love the most, you have reached a very high state. Now, who is the person you like the most? You can say my child, you can say my spouse, you can say whoever you love the most. You can't quantify that love. Even in that exclusive person, are you able to see Brahman in that person? Are you able to see godliness in that person? Huh? Now, all I want you to say is thumbs up or thumbs down. Someone whom you like the most. I don't want to decide whom you like. Whomever you like the most. Thumbs up or thumbs down. I don't say any thumbs. Come on, be sportive, kids. Oh, sorry, I'm saying kids. Spiritually. We're all spiritual children. Therefore, there's a conversation. Okay, I see. But Srimati Ma, she's very confidently raising the thumb up. Everybody's thumbs down. Okay, we'll have to, she has to justify the thumbs up now. Because I'm going to qualify that question now. So be prepared now. Okay, can she be given the access? Yes, ma. Okay, who is it you love the most?
It's so private.
Just for example, discussion sake.
For discussion's sake?
Okay,
then?
you like A or B. Fair enough. You like A.
Yeah.
A, the other person is B. You have pure love. Okay. Now let's say that person does not satisfy, does not cater, does not fit into your mental pattern. He's not satisfying you materially, nor physically, nor emotionally, nor intellectually, nor spiritually.
Oh, that's too lofty.
No. This is what. If somebody is giving me...
There is always something. It's a reciprocal thing sometimes, isn't it?
Then you say business, no? When you say reciprocation, it's a business. You got into a trade business there.
Reciprocal, because I know God loves me just as much as I love God, whoever she is. So, why is it not reciprocal? I know she loves me. She's looking after me, or he's looking after me. So, and I would do anything for her or him. So how is it not reciprocal?
No, it is not that you should not reciprocate. But if it is reciprocal, then it is conditional.
It's not conditional, because even when I'm praying, I'm not asking for things.
Fair enough. So you are loving God for what it is. You're not loving God. You're not loving
what He will give me. Yeah.
Correct. Then it's not reciprocal. It is pure love. I have a feeling for a person or an entity or God itself. For the fact that I have a feeling, I should not qualify it with conditions, isn't it?
And I'm not questioning. Yeah. And I'm not questioning. I'm accepting whatever comes my way.
Absolutely. Then it is not reciprocal. It is pure love. Let's say God has been very busy because COVID times, a lot of attention required, and he has forgotten Srimati Kannan for a while.
That's okay.
Let's, for discussion's sake.
Yeah.
Would your love become conditional? Enna God, I haven't heard for a long time, and I have been sending quite a few urgent messages also. WhatsApp also I sent. I've tried to reach you through Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and I've tried through Zoom also. The message must have zoomed to you, but still you seem to be very undermining all my feeling for you.
No, I know I'm there in the back burner at least.
Now, so what I'm saying is, I don't know, I forgot what I'm saying. I got lost.
You were talking about whether
all this social media, I got lost. Sorry?
We were talking about whether we see God in somebody.
Yes. So when you take someone very, very close to you, even in that emotion, you are not able to see God in it, because you need to be an extremely high level to be able to see the divinity in another person. Even someone who caters to you, in fact, where you have pure unconditional love. We're not even talking of catering. In fact, today I claim to love someone only for the reason that they are able to satisfy something in me. Either they agree with me physically or materially or emotionally or intellectually. Let's say spiritually also you are in line with them. Therefore, you have a feeling for the other person. But the moment the other person doesn't cater to me, what happens to my feeling for that person? Isn't there a slight dip in my feeling for that person? He doesn't agree to me for whatever be the reason. It's not necessary everything must be agreed on, isn't it? But what happens to my feeling for that person? If there is a dip, it is not pure love, it is selfish love. So to be able to see the self in another person is a long, long journey. I'm just being very realistic here. One is a matter of fact, the second is abhyasa. So did we not say that how do you begin your journey? The real challenge, how you can start practicing this principle is try to see the goodness in another person. Did we not say this phrase? There's so much of good in the worst of us. There's so much of bad in the best of us. It doesn't behove to talk about the rest of us. So you got to create an opportunity where you change your perception, where you see a goodness in a certain situation, you see a goodness in a certain person, you're able to see something positive there. And therefore we said, hate the sin, but not the sinner. You hate a particular quality, but you don't have to hate the personality. When you hate a personality for a quality, you are generalizing. You should never generalize. Be specific. I may not like this aspect in you, but that doesn't mean I should stop relating with you. Isn't it? Right. I have, someone is raising a palm there. I think it's Kusuma. You have something to say? This is what that is. Is it inadvertently raised, or you have something to say?
No, nothing.
Okay, fair enough. No problem. So hate the sin, not the sinner. That is the abhyasa. That is how you start practicing it. But slowly but surely you'll reach a state where you'll start identifying with the other person. You have love for others. In fact, I'm reminded of this poem, Abu Ben Adam. I'm sure all of you have read this poem, isn't it? But it's worth mentioning. You know, Ben Adam woke up one night from his sleep and he saw some bright light sitting at the window taking notes. And Ben Adam asks, "What writest thou?" And that light replied, "I am the angel and the messenger of God, and I'm writing names of those who love God." Oh, that's so interesting to know. I'm so glad you chose my window to write. And Ben Adam asked, I am someone who loves my fellow creatures, our fellow beings. Is my name in the list of those who love God? The angel went through the list and said, "Nay, not so. Your name doesn't appear anywhere in the list." And then the story goes, Ben Adam said, "Can you please take down my name as one who loves my fellow beings? I don't know what love for God is." But the angel wrote and disappeared. The next night, promptly it appeared. And the story goes, lo, Ben Adam's name led all the rest. So what is love for God? Love for God is love for his creation. You want to love the Creator when you have no love for his creation. You have no love for his creatures. You claim to have love for God. In the name of religion, you go and slaughter innocent creatures. In the name of God, you are able to hate people in the name of religion. I can't understand what religion are we practicing. If you are able to engender, justify, and hold on to a feeling of animosity or otherness, there is no place in religion. There is no place for spirituality. Therefore, the first quality of a spiritual person in the 12th chapter of the Gita, where he gives 35 qualities of a devotee of God, the first quality of a devotee of God, he says, Adveshtha sarva bhutanam. He who doesn't hate any being, he says. It's not how many people you love, but the moment you have a hatred for any one source or any one particular entity, that's your level. You have lost the challenge. So love for God is love for your fellow creatures, fellow beings. So how you practice in your environment is, you don't have to hate the person for something he or she has. You can still love the person, but you may not like or appreciate a particular quality of a person, but don't detest a person. And when I mentioned this last week, one of our students, he messaged me, I think Sai, I don't know whether he's there in the class today, and he said, Nowadays, whenever you're making the phone call, you get this message. What is the message you get? We are fighting the disease, not the patient. About the virus, yes. You must hate the disease, but not the patient. You are quarantining the disease. We want to kill the disease, but don't kill the patient, please. Is it something to that effect? What is that? How anyone can tell exactly how that ringtone appears? Or you're already sick and tired of it? Never mind. You got the message. That's all matters. All right. So let's move on. We'll take on the next verse, verse 26. Okay. Right. Kamam krodham lobham moham tyaktvatmanam pashyati soham atmajnana vihina mudha te pachante narakanigudha. Kamam krodham lobham moham tyaktvatmanam pashyati soham atmajnana vihina mudha te pachante narakanigudha. As you see, the verse is titled Transcend Desire, Anger, Greed, and further he says delusion as well. Now the translation reads, leaving desire, anger, greed, and delusion, one sees the self. He am I, soham, sa hum, aham, sa is he, aham, I, he am I am that, tat tvamasi, that thou art, aham brahmasmi, I am that. These are the highest known Vedic declarations, nothing greater or profound than that. Tat tvamasi or aham brahmasmi. So you will only reach that state when he says you have left the desire, anger, greed, and delusion. This is the quality control. You can't bypass this and reach there. This is the gateway to get there. And then he says, fools who lack that self-knowledge. Atmajnana vihina mudha. Plenty of them. The mudaha. He says fools. He uses plural tense. Plural tense is plural, plenty of mudaha. Those, the fools who lack self-knowledge, they are tortured as captives in hell. Te pachante narakani guda. I don't know why Shankara has such hatred for us, but maybe he's frustrated, so he just lets go of this. You fellows will be tortured in hell. Torture is torture. Now, what is torture in hell? Remembering seeing the old movies, they will deep fry you, and they will peel your skin with a, what is that? Peeler. They will poke you with all kinds of things. They'll put chili powder. I don't know what all you can imagine. Even new technology also you can imagine. All the tortured in hell. Now, what we should understand, not that you need to be told or informed, hell and heaven are not somewhere right above, somewhere in the clouds. Haven't we all flown up to 35 to 40,000 feet? We all have at some stage, haven't we? Now your memory must be lost because you haven't flown for past 6-7 months. But when you flew, had you seen any on a clear day? Have you seen any realms of worlds existing at 40,000 feet? Harishji is nodding his head. Yes. We need to clarify from him. Please tell me, what have you seen? Have you seen any worlds there up in the clouds? So what all we got to understand is they are not a geographical entity somewhere existing beyond your perception, but rather hell and heaven are states of your mind or the experiences you're going through right here. Now, iha is here, which means wherever you are placed in your situation in life, that experience can be heavenly or that experience can be hellish. You can be cursing every moment, why I'm going through life like this? Why is life putting me through these experiences? You can curse your child, you can curse your family, you can curse your proprietor, you can curse your neighbor, you'll curse the government, you'll curse the weather, you'll curse COVID, you will curse everything. What a hell, man, life. It's not worth living. I've heard from people saying this, better death come to me. Why am I going through this hell? So hell is not what you're experiencing. Hell or heaven is what you make of the experience you're going through. Remember this. It is not the objective world that creates a hellish or a heavenish experience. It is what you make of that experience, whether it is hell or heaven, is your creation. It is not the world. You got to learn this today. If you have learned it, reiterate it today. I know about it. I have learned it long ago. In fact, when I was a kid only, I heard, who said that, John Milton. When I was a kid, I learned the John Milton, the British English poet, John Milton. I learned it from him. You are now telling me I learned it. No, what is the point knowing it? Are you practicing it? That is important. It's not what you know. And what are the famous words of John Milton? Leave your mind in its own place. If your mind is left to itself, it has the capacity to make a hell out of a heaven out of hell. It's all your own mind. And that mind is the realm of these emotions. Emotions are a realm of your mind, isn't it? All the emotions. Can you name some emotions for me? What are the emotions that constant? In fact, mind is the warehouse where all these emotions are housed. Usha Kondinyama, can you share some emotions? Just a minute. I think you will be given the access.
Jealousy, it can be hatred.
Yeah. I'm saying mind is a warehouse. Warehouse le ella irkum illaya. Now, what are the emotions that are there in the mind? You said jealousy. You said hatred. What else is there?
Happiness.
Happiness. Happiness is an emotion. Huh? Happiness is a state of your mind.
Okay.
Which is defined by the emotions
joy.
It has.
Happy, being happy.
Okay. It's a state of mind.
Okay.
Being happy also is a heavenly.
Okay. What about sadness?
Again, is a state of mind.
Okay.
Very sorry to put you on a spot of bother. What are the emotions that your mind has? Okay, let's...
Fear.
Fear. Okay, fear. Yeah, I think wonderful, Ma. Gayatri Ma also wants the same thing. Why is it getting difficult to give them the permission? Yeah, Gayatri, I think now you can.
Emotions are kamam, krodham, lobham, moham.
Oh my God.
These are the major ones.
Kamam. This is what Adi Shankaracharya is saying. I want what Gayatri Ma is saying. You are cheating. Openly you're copying what Shankaracharya is saying. Kamam, Krodham, Lobham, Moham is what Adi Shankaracharya says. Yes, which is Kamam is desire, anger, greed. Yes, correct. Love. Yes. Okay. Okay. Sudhakar Garu, can be given the access? And afterwards, even Tinkima also wants to say something. Harishik, can you take over the control of giving them the mic access? I think Vijay is having difficulty. Yes, ma. We shall. The only thing is there will be a lot of disturbance. That's the only thing. What's happening, Harishji? Okay, just unmute everyone, and if in case we have any reason, we will mute them back again. We'll have to have KPI very soon. If the people who are in post are not performing well, we'll have to. Yes. Okay. Now, yeah, Tinkima, I think you have been given access. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so I think there are both positive and negative emotions, and I think when based on all that we have been hearing from you, when we are in touch with the Atman in ourselves, perhaps we manifest the higher emotions like love, joy, serenity, calmness, peace, compassion, gratitude, wisdom. And when we are in touch with our lower self, or at that moment, then that is when the kama, krodha, lobha, moh, delusion, all of that manifests. Actually, I think all are present within us. And if we are aware, we can choose to manifest in that situation, in that interaction, at that moment, the higher, because that way we wouldn't probably create future karma, negative karma.
Yes, very well said. Very well, beautifully summed up, ma. So the host of negative emotions and a host of positive emotions are all there within us, and beyond that lies the Atman. So the emotions are a medium, whether the self reflects through you, emotions, whether they become an obstruction, whether is it a medium of reflecting, or whether they block the self, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, Sudhakar Garu, you have something to say?
Yeah, I was about to tell the same thing. There are quite a number of umpteen number of emotions are there within us.
Yeah.
They can be classified as only negative and positive. That is exactly what I wanted to tell. Tinkiyam has already told.
Yeah, wonderful. No, but it's what's good to notice. You're all thinking along with the text, thinking along with me. Now, what happens is all these emotions, whether you put negative and positive. Now let's get to the next step. Always I take it methodic, step by step, to build a thought. Now, hell and heaven are defined by the emotions. So positive emotions are define your heavenly experience. The negative emotions define your hell. Now these emotions cloud your intellectual clarity. It also clouds the divinity within, isn't it? The emotions cloud your intellect. The emotions also cloud the Atman within, the divinity within. Now, what is the root of all these emotions? Where do these emotions surface from? What is its root? It's like root of a plant or a tree. That is the source where everything has emerged from. Now, I'm not asking the seed. I'm asking the root of all emotions. So don't give me answers to the seed. The seed comes the root, and then comes all the manifestations of, you see, of a plant, of a stem, branch, leaves, fruits, or flowers. So all these are the emotions. So my question is, what is the root of all these emotions? Thought, we are not. In fact, emotions can actually be classified as irrational thoughts. There is no rationality in emotion. You just feel. You either love someone or hate someone, but there is no reasoning there. Vasanas. Should I not feel anger when I see a group of people being oppressed? How will I rise in action? Now, that's up to you what you feel. You can always justify and say that they are experiencing whatever they deserve. They are only experiencing their own consequence of actions. Intellectually, you only justify that life gives what one deserves. Intellectually. Emotionally, you feel sorry for them. Physically, you do what you can do to them. So when a situation presents itself, intellect must understand that there's a reason why things happen in life. Everything is based on the law of karma. I was speaking of it a few weeks ago. There's a law of karma which is cause and effect. So there is a law that governs everyone's life. You understand that my life and everyone's life is defined by this law of deserving. So don't know what they have done to deserve it. So you have to intellectually understand. So your thoughts are very clear. You're very rational there. Emotionally, you identify with them. You feel sorry for them. But your actions must be driven on intellect, not on emotion. Remember this. Once you have to have clear thought, you also have a pure emotion, but don't operate on emotion, operate in reason. So your actions must be, in what way can I relieve their suffering? To what extent am I duty bound? You go on doing it. But if you operate on emotion, then you have no control over your actions. You become impulsive, you become emotional, you get attached. You lose the real beauty and grandeur of bringing the best out of you, because you got carried away. Okay. Now, in fact, Setaramanji and Harishji have actually, I think even Soumyama, Dharini, I think, Dharanima has mentioned very clearly that desire is the root of all these emotions. So it is the root, desire, it all stems from the desire. Whether be it anger, whether be it love, whether be it charity, whether be it kindness, whether be it compassion, whether be it fear, all branch out from the root of desire. And all happens is when your desires are met and your desires are not met. I'm not going to go into the details of all these emotions, but there's a few that's mentioned here. As he starts off by saying, Kamam, Krodham, Lobham, Moham. Krodham is anger. When do you get angry? Don't say most of the time. That is subjective. I don't want to get into that personal life of yours. But when does one get angry? When things don't happen the way I want. When I have a particular way of life, when things don't happen the way I want it to happen, I get angry. And your anger is directly proportional to the intensity of your desire. If your desire is strong, your anger is greater manifested. If you have a mild desire, it's a minor irritation. So it's okay, you just dismiss it. But when desire is not met, you get angry. When desires are met, you become lobha, greed. When you've got what you wanted, what do you want? You want more. And both of these leave you into a realm of delusion, moha. Moha is where you got clouded by these emotions. And the result of that, what is the result of being clouded by these emotions? What happens when your emotions flare up? When you get deluded, what happens? Rajima, what happens when you get deluded? Something is not right today, huh? You're not able to. You're not the host, co-host. You can do that, aren't you? Never mind, ma. Some technical thing. It happens. Now, what I'm asking is, when you get into a state of delusion, what happens is the question. Now, lots of peace and intellect gets clouded. That is delusion. Delusion is where you lost your peace of mind. You get clouded, you get deluded. All that is a state of delusion. But what happens when you get deluded? Your actions are conditional, compulsive. You lose self-control. We're not talking of self-control here. What are we talking about? Come back to the text. What are we talking about? When you get deluded, what happens? When you get deluded, you do not see the self, my dear. But one who has transcended, one who has tyaktva, one who has renounced kamam, krodham, lobham, moham, such a person can experience the pashyati soham. Pashyati means sees. You have that inner perception of able to experience soham, sa aham. When these two words, saha and aham, come together, it becomes soham. What does soham mean? You declare, he am I, which is a state of non-dual, which we just spoke in the beginning of the class. Plurality, duality to non-duality. Non-duality is where you become one with that, where you say, I am that, aham brahmasmi, I am that truth. So you will reach that state of enlightenment or realization when you have transcended the emotions which are risen from the desire. But if you have not conquered, you will go through a hell or heaven. Now, is that what happened in Mahabharata to Dhritarashtra? Dhritarashtra was he not a blind king? He was blind, literally, physically. He was also blind to the attachment to his son Duryodhana. Because of his attachment to his son, what happened? He could not see the evils of his son. All the atrocities his son was doing, he could not see all that, isn't it? He was blindfolded. Similarly, when you are blindfolded to your desires, you also stoop down to the world. You are carried away by the desires, the vega, the force of these desires, and end up committing a sin. So it is your own desires that compel you to commit a sin. It is what in the 3rd chapter Krishna says very clearly to Arjuna, Jahi Shatrum Mahabaho Kama Rupam Durasadam. He says, Jahi Shatrum, conquer this enemy, Arjuna. The enemy is in the form of your desire. The enemy is not out there across the battlefield. The enemy is right within you. Jahi Shatrum Mahabaho Kama Rupam. It is that enemy in the form of your own desire, your own selfishness, your own attachment. And so desire actually is personified as a barrier between you and God, between man and God. Therefore, it's an often said equation, but I'm mentioning it for those who have not heard it, and it's a reiteration for those who know about it. The equation is man minus desires equals divinity. Human minus desires equals God, equals divinity. Man minus desires equals God. So who is a man and woman? Huh? That's why I said human. So all the ladies can be very flow. It's all their desires. So we are liberated. No, no, no. It is a human. So who is a human? God plus desires. I will have to take up this session separately one day. God plus desires is a human being. So you take out the desires from the equation. God plus desires equals man. If God plus desires equals a man, you take away the desires from the equation, man equals God. That is what exactly he's saying. Having transcended the desire and the emotions which rise from the desire, you will be able to perceive the truth and say, Soham, I am that Aham, I am the truth. But once you are blinded and deluded by the desires, you will be roasted and toasted in hell. No, either you want to go to these hellish and heavenish experiences, or do you want to reach the self of that divinity? The choice is with you. It all boils down to how are you handling these desires within you. Now, is there anyone amongst us who doesn't have a desire? Please raise your hand. Namaskaram. Is there anyone amongst us who doesn't have desire? Every one of us, like it or not, have desires, isn't it? Now they are saying you must reach a state of no desire. Now let's start getting into the application of it, applicability of it. The rest of the class I'll talk about it, but I must mention this because if you don't, it is a matter of information. Oh, you must get rid of desires. Desire is a barrier between me and God. Fair enough. You understand that. But then how do you get rid of, how do you reach a state? So there are three standpoints. First is one has a desire. Second point is the barrier, what I'm going to ask. The third is where you have no desire. So how do you reach a state from desire to no desire? So what is the stage in between having a desire to a state where you have got rid of the desire? So what is that in between the two? When all desires are met, you're left with no desires. The way you put it is mostly hypothetical. It's impossible to meet all your desires. In fact, in the Shastras, they say your mind is like fire. And the analogy they say is the fire has got the capacity to consume the entire forest and is yet ready to consume more, isn't it? No mind, no desire, no mind will say enough is enough. Thank you. Now, so the question is, when is enough enough? Is enough ever enough? It is never enough. That is what is symbolized by Ravana. You go on to the desire. He had a harem from the heaven. He wanted Sita. That is your mind. That is my mind. Remember this. So Ramayana is only telling us the Ravana is within you. You must invoke the Rama to kill the Ravana. Rama means the self, the thought of divinity, the thought of the higher. As Tinkima earlier said, when you identify with the self, it rises higher thoughts and nobler emotions. When you identify with the world, with the lower, it kindles all the greed and obsession and anger and hatred. The lower emotions overwhelm you. So you must invoke the Rama in you to kill the 10-headed monster Ravana within. They're all subjective, but it's all within. Philosophically, but it's subjective. Ravana is within me. Rama also is within me, isn't it? Now the question is, what is in between desire and no desire? Through control, develop a strong intellect. Turn your mind to the higher to drop the lower desire. Get attached to the higher, like a child growing up and losing the attachment for the toys. Develop a spirit of contentment. You know, the answer is actually given in the second verse of the Bhajagovindam. If you go back to the second verse, if I'm not wrong, it's second verse. Huh? There he says, let me double check the number. He says, Mudha jahihi dhanagama trishna kuru sadbuddhim manasi vitrishna. He says, O fool, give up the thirst for acquiring. He doesn't say give up acquisition. He is only saying give up the thirst for acquisition. Trishna. So what is the stage between the desire? Okay, now when a person has a desire for something, what happens? When a person has a desire for something, isn't the mind constantly worshipping the object of desire? Every time that the object comes in sight, doesn't the mind get excited? He sees an advertisement, doesn't the mind get excited? Isn't it? So the mind is doing nitya smarana. The mind is constantly craving for the object, isn't it? There is a rush, there is a craving, there is an obsession. Your mind is actually worshipping that object of desire which you want. It is your dream, and what you're doing, you're pitching up your happiness in that. Oh, I'll be happy only I get that. Isn't that the state of the mind? So when you are in the state of the first category, the desire, your mind is constantly craving, longing, aspiring. Now what you got do is try to get rid of the desiring in the desire. You at least start controlling the craving of the desire. The desire will go later, but at least control the desiring in the desire. Control the craving in the desire. Control the uncontrollable nature in the desire. At least that you can control. Control the thirst, the trishna. So when you control the trishna or the thirst, slowly but surely you will have your mind under your control and the desire will slowly fade away. And then only you can direct it to the higher. When you have no control over the desire, how can you think of anything else? Isn't it? The desire consumes your mind. Absolutely. The mind becomes a slave. You have no control over it. So the real control is you must be a master of the mind, not the slave of the mind. Now, how many of us can claim that I have my mind under my control? Can we claim that? Many people have, in fact, a few have really called me, confessed to me and said, sir, I'm doing everything that all the spiritual practices I'm doing, meditation, I'm doing that, I'm doing this, but my mind is not under control. So the objective of, what is the objective of spiritual exercise? What is the ultimate objective? And if that objective is not met, I would want to question what exercise you're into. Am I doing the right thing? It's like you go to a doctor and say, doctor, I'm taking all the medications you're given, but still the symptoms are not going. The doctor would say, either you're being given the wrong medicine, the medicine doesn't suit you, or there's a wrong dosage, isn't it? He either changes the medicine or dosage until he starts seeing the favorable results. So you may say, sir, I'm doing all, I get up in the morning, I do my prayers, I do the puja, I do rituals, I do charity, I do all what, in fact, I do more than what is prescribed. Because spirituality now has become a buffet, self-help. I can do all, I have read so many books. I follow all possible spiritual gurus. I'm a lifetime member in everything. But in spite of that, what is the end result? My mind is not in my control. Now, what is the ultimate objective of spiritual journey? Don't talk self-realization. Don't tell Soham. Don't tell Aham Brahmasmi. That is all good for the text. The reality I'm saying. What is the ultimate objective? I want to be a better person. Now, what is the definition of a better person? Even that definition of a better person, isn't that very dynamic? Doesn't that change with a greater knowledge, with a greater perception? It is a quite evolving, isn't it? But the ultimate objective, happiness, very true, peace and happiness. In fact, the ultimate objective or the test you can all put yourself through is the spiritual evolution can be measured with mind control, where your mind is under your control. If your mind is under your control, believe me, you have some wisdom. Now, in the 1 hour, in fact, it's just 1 hour, 5 minutes. How many of you can say that your mind has not left the classroom? I know some of you I have seen. You're very much on the screen. But has your mind, how long has your mind been here, Harishji? No, you will have to unmute yourself and then give the answer. In percentage. Don't tell me you can't unmute yourself.
70-30.
70 outside and 30 inside, or 70 inside or 30 outside?
The other way around, 30-70.
What is that?
Wandering 30% of the time.
Oh, that's not a bad state, because he has to oversee what's happening. That's the reason it's 30% or 70% inside. But still 30% your mind goes, isn't it? You know, who is the only person who has kept the mind 100% in the classroom? Not because of any talent or is any strength, is because I am forced to keep my mind constantly in the present. If I am not kept my mind in the present, I would have easily got lost in what all I have said. I will lose my track. I don't know where am I. I don't know what am I saying. And I will not make sense very soon to you. I say, what is he saying? Man, there is no connection between what he said just then and where is he gone now, and he got lost. But if you are able to keep your mind, in fact, real wisdom is measured with your capacity of the intellect to be able to keep the mind in its present. It all boils down to as simple as that. Well, whether your mind does it listen to you, or are you listening to the mind, is all that matters. If your mind listens to you, you are of extraordinary wisdom. You have some character, some strength. But if you end up listening to whatever the mind has to say, you have fallen a prey to the Ravana within. Remember this. So you got to get into that state of trying to practice the desiring in the desire. Get a control of the desiring nature. If you can get control of the craving. I've mentioned this before. I don't know how many of you have heard. Some of you who are new to it may not have captured it this way. There are three tendencies of the mind. The tendencies of the mind before the experience, while you're experiencing, and after the experience. This is that. If you want to know whether I have a control over the mind, examine it through these three states. Before the experience, what does your mind do? While, what does it do? After, what does it do? If you're not doing all three, then you have a control. So before the experience, what does the mind do? Before the experience, the mind usually gets into a, as I've said, longing, craving, wanting. There's a obsession, there's an anxiety before the experience. You want that object, isn't it? I want that, I want that, I want that. It's like a child jumping with excitement when you're taking the child to ice cream parlor to buy ice cream. The child is so excited, I'm getting ice cream. It is excited, it's jumping with joy, it wants that. The anxiety. The childishness is there in the mind. The mind gets excited. While you are enjoying, what happens? You are indulging. And you tell each other, it's okay, it's okay. You eat slowly. If you want, I'll buy one more, but don't just gallop the whole thing. Just slowly, slowly. Enjoy, enjoy. Take your time, take your time. So while you're experiencing, you start indulging, you go berserk. You are reckless. You just run, your mind runs helter-skelter, gets excited, gets carried away. It doesn't have a sense of proportion, how much it's taking, what it's taking. Just gets lost in it. I'm reminded of Chota Chetan. It was, I think, the first 3D movie I remember seeing it, unless you've seen it overseas those years. And I remember the most powerful impressions of that movie was how all the kids are swimming in that ice cream tub. Isn't it? You all remember that? Okay, what do you remember of Chota Chetan? Yes, Gayatri Ma. Same thing, huh? You also remember ice cream only. Okay. Someone agrees to me at least. Huh? So you are indulging, you get completely, have no control, you get lost in it. And after the experience, what do? You relive those mental joys and create further impressions through the process, what is known as lingering. You linger. So the three weaknesses of the mind, you are either craving, you're either indulging, or you're either lingering. So wisdom is measured by arresting these three natures of the mind. You will not crave, you will not indulge, you will not linger. Write it down and keep measuring yourself how far you're able to master it. It is not what others talk about you. It's not how others evaluate you. You must be very clear to evaluate yourself. This is wisdom. You don't have to go anywhere beyond this. And if you have a mastery over your own mind and the desires and the emotions which surface from it, very certainly but surely the perception of the self, it is not black and white, it is in stages. As you evolve to that extent, you are able to envision the self. It's not black, jet black and pure white. It's all shades of gray. That's how spiritual evolution is. So as you evolve, that perception of the self, aham brahmasmi, as I've said, soham, it starts becoming clearer. You're able to experience that oneness. You're able to see that divinity. Man minus desires equals God. So you start changing the very nature of desires. You change the quality of desires. And also the quantum goes. Quality and quantity. The lower drops, the refinedness picks up. Ultimately, what is left is the self. It's a journey. It's a long journey. I'm in it. The question is, are you in it? The question is, are you ready to fight it out? As the Gita says throughout the 3rd chapter, in fact, throughout the Gita, he keeps saying this. It is the Shatrum, he says. The Shatrum, the enemy is right within you. Are you willing to fight out that enemy within you? Or are you giving in to the enemy and feeding the enemy? Make that choice. There's enough wisdom here that is trying to pull you out of it. So remember, you've got to transcend the desire and the emotions. So don't get clouded and caught up in the emotions. Emotions cloud your thinking. Emotions cloud your divinity. So whenever you are riding on emotions, don't commit to them. Try to get out of the emotion quicker you can. Try to nip it in the bud. Don't allow emotions to overwhelm you. And if it does, you will pay the price and the consequence. Right? That's a beautiful thought. And I've given it in the pure philosophy. I've given it in the applied philosophy. So this is 2 perspectives. Any scripture has to be approached this way. Only when you approach it this way, then there's a takeaway. Otherwise, it's only a matter of information. So please ponder over it and try to create opportunities where you can practice it. And then you'll start seeing the difference. But continue to do the process of reflection we spoke about last week. That is important. Only when you do that exercise, you'll start seeing a definite change in your thought processes. Okay? We'll come back. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purna Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.